My name is Clementine Brooks, and I am 35 years old. For 15 years, a memory has lived in my head, rent-free, turning my triumphs into ashes and my quiet moments into tribunals. Tonight, I was going back to the source of that memory. I was going back to my high school reunion, not for forgiveness or for nostalgia, but for a reckoning. They had no idea the woman they were about to see, the class loser they remembered, was the same person whose books they were all reading, whose world they were all obsessed with. They were about to meet Verity Thorne, and she was going to burn their little world to the ground. It all started with an award I never wanted and a sound I can never forget: the squeal of a pig. It wasn't just one person. It was a chorus, an orchestra of oinks and snorts rising from the back of the Northgate High Auditorium during the Senior Awards Assembly. Every head turned, first to the back, then to me, as I walked the loneliest aisle of my life to receive a certificate for excellence in English composition. The laughter that followed that first oink was a physical blow. It crushed the air from my lungs and pinned me in a spotlight of pure, unadulterated humiliation. That was the moment my pain found a purpose. That was the day the story began. If you've ever felt like an outsider, if you've ever been made to feel small so someone else could feel big, hit that like button. Let me know this story is reaching you. And I'd love to see where you're all watching from tonight, so drop your city or country in the comments below. Now, settle in, because this is the story of how I took the worst day of my life and turned it into my masterpiece. High school, for me, was a masterclass in invisibility. I was not part of the ecosystem. I was the dirt it grew in. My days were a careful navigation of social minefields, my routes through the hallways planned with the precision of a military strategist to avoid the apex predators. At the top of that food chain were Tanner and Jessica Reilly. Mark was the classic jock, handsome in a way that seemed machine-tooled, his charisma a blunt instrument he used to hammer everyone into their proper place. Jessica was his counterpart, the queen of whispers. Her power wasn't in overt aggression but in the surgical strike of a well-timed rumor, a perfectly aimed sneer that could dismantle a person's confidence in seconds. And orbiting them, the sun to their planets, was Brittany Vance. She was beautiful, effortlessly so. Her laughter was the soundtrack to every popular kid's party, her life a curated feed of sunshine and success long before social media made it a profession. She wasn't overtly cruel like Mark or Jessica. Her crime was one of benign neglect. She saw what they did, she heard the whispers and the jokes, and she did nothing. Her silence was her endorsement, and in some ways, that hurt more than their noise. I spent my lunches in the library, not out of a pure love for literature, though that was there, but because it was a demilitarized zone. The shelves of books were my barricades. The Dewey Decimal System was my shield. It was there, amidst the scent of old paper and binding glue, that I found my only ally. Mr. Harrison was our English teacher, a man whose rumpled tweed jackets and weary eyes hid a fierce passion for the underdog. He saw something in my essays that I didn't see in myself. He saw a voice. "Clementine," he told me one afternoon, handing back a paper I'd written, his red pen comments more voluminous than my actual text. "You have a gift for observation. You see the things that happen in the margins, the things most people are too busy or too self-absorbed to notice." I mumbled something about just writing what I saw. "Don't ever diminish that," he said, his gaze intense. "Your words have power. They can build worlds or they can expose the rot in this one. Don't ever let them silence you. Write it all down. That's your weapon." I held onto his words like a talisman. While others were learning the rules of social engagement at football games and house parties, I was learning the architecture of narrative. I filled notebooks with character sketches, with dialogue I overheard, with descriptions of the casual cruelty that flowed through the halls of Northgate High, like a toxic current. The constant ostracism didn't break me, it forged me. Being denied access to their world forced me to build my own. Because I had no one to talk to, I learned to listen with an almost painful intensity. Because I was never invited anywhere, I had endless hours to read and to write. I honed my craft in the crucible of their contempt. My parents, bless them, were oblivious. They were good people, but they operated on a simple frequency. Good grades meant a good kid. They saw my report cards, saw the straight A's, and assumed I was thriving. They couldn't comprehend the complex, brutal social hierarchy that I was failing to ascend. To them, high school was just a phase to be gotten through, a stepping stone to the real world. I never told them about the names, the shoving in the hallways, the invitations I never received. How could I explain that my pain wasn't from a scraped knee or a failed test, but from 1,000 tiny cuts of insignificance? How could I explain that my greatest desire was simply to be seen, and my greatest fear was that I already was? This quiet suffering, this stockpiling of slights and injustices went on for 4 years. I developed a kind of emotional armor. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself their opinions were worthless. But late at night, in the privacy of my own room, the armor would crack and the hurt would seep in. I built my resilience on a foundation of spite. Every time Mark Tanner called me Clem the Grem and his friends laughed, I added another paragraph to my secret stories. Every time Jessica Reilly looked me up and down with that dismissive curl of her lip, I refined the motivations of a particularly nasty villain in my fictional world. I funneled all my adolescent rage, my yearning, my despair onto the page. The world inside my notebooks became more real, more vibrant than the one I was forced to inhabit from Monday to Friday. The characters were composites, amalgams of the people around me. The heroes were outcasts, the forgotten, the underestimated. And the villains were works of exquisite, detailed revenge. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just surviving. I was doing research. I was gathering the raw material for a future I couldn't yet imagine. The social neglect that was meant to diminish me was inadvertently giving me the one thing I would need to conquer them all, a story worth telling. And the final, brutal chapter of that high school story was about to be written. The senior awards assembly was supposed to be a formality, a tedious rite of passage before the freedom of graduation. I knew I was getting a certificate. Mr. Harrison had told me, a proud smile on his face. See? The pen is mightier than the pom-poms. I was nervous, but a tiny, fragile bud of pride was trying to bloom in my chest. For one brief moment, I would be recognized for something I was good at. My name was called. For excellence in English composition, Clementine Brooks. I stood up from my seat in the vast, anonymous middle section of the auditorium. I smoothed down my dress, a simple floral thing my mom had bought me, and started the long walk toward the stage. The silence felt heavy, expectant. And then it came. A single, high-pitched oink. It was from the back, from the jock section, Mark's section. A few snickers followed. I froze for a millisecond, my blood turning to ice. Ignore it. Keep walking. Then another one came, deeper, snorting. Oink oink. This time, the laughter was louder. It rippled through the rows. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, not seeing an award winner, but a target. My face burned with a heat so intense I thought I might actually combust. The stage seemed miles away. The principal, Mr. Daniels, was frowning at the microphone, clearing his throat. Settle down, settle down. But it was too late. Jessica Reilly, from her seat in the front row with the student council, turned around and made a show of looking for the source of the noise, a fake, concerned look on her face that was more damning than any insult. She caught my eye and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug, a gesture that said, "What can you do? Boys will be boys." And in that moment, I hated her more than Mark. Even Brittany, sitting next to her, offered no help. She just looked down at her hands, a silent accomplice to my vivisection. The oinks became a chorus. It was the soundtrack to my shame. I finally reached the stage, my legs trembling. I snatched the certificate from Principal Daniel's hand, not even making eye contact, and practically ran back to my seat. The walk of fame had become a perp walk. The rest of the assembly was a blur. The heat in my face subsided, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. The fragile bud of pride had been stomped into the dirt. They had taken my one small moment of recognition and turned it into my deepest humiliation. The prank wasn't just cruel, it was pointed. They called me Piggy in whispers for years, a stupid nickname born from a day I'd accidentally snorted when I laughed in freshman biology. They had saved it, polished it, and unveiled it for the grand finale. After the assembly, I hid in the girls' bathroom, locking myself in a stall and letting the silent, hot tears stream down my face. The injustice was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I hadn't done anything to them. I had only ever tried to be invisible, and even that wasn't enough. They had to hunt me down and make an example of me. After a few minutes, I heard the door swing open and the sound of familiar voices. Jessica and Brittany. Can you believe Mark? Jessica laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my raw nerves. I thought Principal Daniels was going to have an aneurysm. It was kind of mean, Jess, Brittany said, her voice lacking any real conviction. Oh, lighten up, Britt. It was funny. Did you see her face? She looked like she was going to cry. That was it. A dam of anger broke inside me. I unlocked the stall door and stepped out, my face tear-stained and blotchy. They both stopped talking and stared at me. Why? The word came out as a broken whisper. Jessica recovered first, her face hardening into its default setting of bored condescension. Why what? Why would you do that? I asked, my voice gaining a little strength. What did I ever do to you? She rolled her eyes, leaning against the sink and crossing her arms. God, it was a joke, Clementine. You need to get a sense of humor. It's not our fault you're so sensitive. It wasn't a joke, I said, my voice shaking. It was cruel. You did it to hurt me. Look, she said, pushing herself off the sink and stepping toward me, her voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. This is just how the world works. Some people are popular, and some people are, well, you should have just stayed home. She brushed past me, her shoulder bumping mine, and walked out. Brittany lingered for a moment, an unreadable expression on her face. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it, shook her head, and followed Jessica out of the bathroom, leaving me alone with my reflection in the cracked mirror. That night, the humiliation curdled into something else. It became cold, hard, and sharp. It became resolve. I went home, ignored my parents' cheerful questions about the assembly, and locked myself in my room. The certificate lay on my desk, a monument to my shame. I looked at it, then at my wall of bookshelves, then at the fresh, empty notebook waiting for me. I remembered Mr. Harrison's words, "That's your weapon." I picked up a pen. The cap clicked with a sound of finality. I wasn't writing a diary entry about how sad I was. I wasn't writing a letter I would never send. I was writing a story. I wrote about a pig-faced girl, an outcast in a kingdom of impossibly beautiful people, but this girl had a secret. In the quiet of her chambers, she could weave shadows into solid objects. She could spin darkness into daggers. She could take the ugliness the world threw at her and turn it into power. I named the arrogant prince who tormented her Malachor. I named the whispering, backstabbing courtier Jesmine. I named the beautiful, silent princess who watched it all happen Brianna. I wrote until my fingers ached and the sun began to rise. I didn't feel hurt anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt a surge of something new, something powerful and dangerous. I felt like I was forging a sword. The age of Clementine Brooks, the victim, was over. The age of Verity Thorne, the storyteller, had just begun. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a clean slate. It wasn't. The ghost of Northgate High followed me, a constant, whispering companion. I chose a university 3 states away, a place where no one knew my name or my history, but I still carried it with me. I was shy, withdrawn, conditioned to expect rejection. I saw cliques forming in the dorm lounges and lecture halls and instinctively retreated. The muscle memory of my high school survival tactics was too strong. Head down, stay in the margins, don't draw attention. My life became a grueling routine. Classes during the day, a dishwashing job in the campus cafeteria at night, and a weekend shift stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store. The work was exhausting, mindless. My hands were perpetually chapped from the hot water and harsh soap, my back ached from lifting heavy boxes. But it was necessary. My parents helped where they could, but they couldn't afford to foot the entire bill. Meanwhile, my old life played out in glossy, filtered squares on my phone screen. I was a masochist, scrolling through Facebook and Instagram, watching the lives of my tormentors unfold. It was a form of self-harm, a way of reminding myself what I was fighting against. Mark Tanner's profile was a shrine to his own success. He'd taken over his father's car dealership and expanded it. Photos of him cutting ribbons, shaking hands with the mayor, standing beside gleaming luxury cars. His captions were full of hashtags like boss life and hustle. Jessica Reilly had married a man twice her age and 3 times as rich. Her feed was an endless parade of designer bags, exotic vacations, and smug couple selfies from the decks of yachts. She'd traded her high school crown for a diamond one, her power still derived from proximity to influence. And Brittany. Brittany had become a professional version of her high school self, an influencer. Her life was a performance of aspirational perfection. Yoga poses on pristine beaches, artfully arranged brunch spreads, posts about mindfulness and living your truth that felt like a slap in the face. She was monetizing the same effortless privilege that had protected her in high school. I'd look at their photos while eating instant noodles that tasted like salt and regret, my textbooks piled high around me. The contrast was a sharp, physical pain. They were living the lives everyone assumed they would. They had stepped from the bubble of high school popularity directly into a world that rewarded them for it. I, on the other hand, was fighting for every inch. But in that fight, something began to change. The loneliness that had once been a prison slowly became a workshop. With no social life to distract me, I had nothing but time. Time to study, time to work, and time to write. The story that began on the night of my humiliation grew. It evolved from a single act of vengeance into a sprawling epic. The Sunken Kingdom Chronicles started to take shape, its world becoming more detailed, its magic system more complex. The piggy girl became Alara of the Sunken City, her shadow weaving a metaphor for turning pain into power. Slowly, cautiously, I began to let people in. My freshman roommate, Sarah, was a boisterous art major who saw my closed-off nature not as a weakness, but as a mystery to be solved. One night, she saw me scribbling in my notebook and, with her characteristic lack of boundaries, snatched it from my hands. "Hey, what's this?" she asked, her eyes scanning the page. I panicked, reaching for it. "Nothing, just stupid stuff." But she held it away, her expression changing from playful to intrigued. "Holy crap, Clem, this is good, like, really good." Her validation was a crack of light in a dark room. For the first time, someone outside of Mr. Harrison had seen my secret world and hadn't laughed. She became my first reader, my cheerleader, devouring every new chapter I wrote and demanding more. Then came Professor Albright in my sophomore creative writing seminar. He was a published poet with a reputation for being brutally honest. I submitted the first 50 pages of my manuscript for my final project, terrified he would tear it apart. He called me into his office. The manuscript lay on his desk, covered in notes. My stomach plummeted. "Miss Brooks," he said, peering at me over his glasses. "This is ambitious." I braced for the criticism. "It's also raw, compelling, and intensely marketable," he continued, a small smile playing on his lips. "The rage in these pages is palpable. It's a commercial engine. Have you ever considered trying to get an agent?" That conversation changed everything. It was the first time someone had spoken of my writing, not as a hobby or a coping mechanism, but as a career. It was the first time I dared to believe it could be. With Professor Albright's guidance, I polished my manuscript. I wrote a query letter. I bought a book of literary agents and started sending it out. The rejections came, dozens of them. Form letters, polite brush-offs. It was demoralizing, but the calluses I developed in high school served me well. I was used to rejection. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from a New York number. "Is this Clementine Brooks?" a fast-talking voice asked. "This is David Chen from Apex Literary. I just read the first 100 pages of your manuscript. I need to know what happens next." David became my champion. He was sharp, relentless, and he believed in my book with a ferocity that stunned me. He saw the commercial appeal Professor Albright had mentioned. He helped me shape the manuscript into something even stronger, more focused. "We need a pseudonym," he said one day, "something that sounds classic, epic. Brooks is too plain." I didn't tell him the real reason I wanted a pseudonym was to hide, to keep my world separate from theirs, to ensure Mark and Jessica and Brittany could never connect the book to the girl they'd tormented. "How about Verity Thorn?" I suggested. Verity, for truth, Thorn, for the pain that had created it. "I love it," he said. "It's perfect." After a grueling round of submissions, David called me. I was just finishing a shift at the grocery store, my hands smelling of cardboard and disinfectant. "Are you sitting down, Verity?" he asked, the excitement in his voice electric. "No, I'm in the dairy aisle." "Well, sit down on a carton of yogurt or something. We have an offer, a big one, from Blackwood Publishing." I sank to the floor right there between the milk and the cheese, my phone pressed to my ear. He told me the number, and it was so much more money than I had ever imagined that it didn't feel real. It was an abstract concept. But the number wasn't the victory was the validation. It was the proof. Every late night, every miserable shift, every moment of humiliation had led to this. I had taken their ugliness and spun it into gold. I was no longer Clementine Brooks, the victim. I was Verity Thorne, the author, and I was just getting started. The Shadow Weaver's Oath was released on a cold Tuesday in October. I spent the day in a state of suspended terror, refreshing sales rankings online, convinced it would sink without a trace. It didn't sink, it flew. It debuted at number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list. The publisher was ecstatic. David was screaming with joy over the phone. I just stared at the screen, at my pseudonym, Verity Thorne, listed among authors I had idolized my whole life. It felt like a dream. The success was meteoric and bewildering. The Sunken Kingdom Chronicles became a word-of-mouth sensation, then a full-blown cultural phenomenon. It was praised for its intricate world-building, its complex characters, and its raw emotional core. Critics called Alara, my protagonist, a new icon of feminist fantasy, a heroine for the overlooked. They had no idea how literally true that was. The money was transformative. I quit my jobs. I paid off my student loans in a single transaction that made my hands shake. I bought a small, beautiful apartment in a city far from my hometown and filled it with books. For the first time in my life, I felt secure, I felt safe. But the financial security was secondary to the emotional vindication. Every fan letter, every glowing review, every person who told me Alara's story had made them feel seen, was a direct refutation of my past. It was proof that my pain had value. The second and third books were even more successful. A major film studio bought the rights in a 7-figure deal. Suddenly, Verity Thorne was a household name, and no one knew it was me. I did interviews via email, maintained a mysterious public profile, and used a stock photo for my author bio. The privacy was my shield. Then, one day, about 5 years after the first book was published, I got a message on Facebook. It was from Brittany Vance. My heart hammered in my chest. I hadn't spoken to her since that day in the bathroom 15 years ago. My first instinct was to delete and block, but curiosity got the better of me. Her profile picture was different. The glossy influencer sheen was gone. She looked tired, her smile strained. A quick scroll through her public feed told the story. Her husband, the one from the yacht photos, had been indicted for fraud. Their assets were frozen. The beautiful life she had curated had crumbled into a very public, very messy scandal. Her message was hesitant. Hey Clementine, long time no see. This is probably super random, but I was thinking about you. I remember you were always so smart and good with, well, everything. I'm going through some stuff and I was wondering if I could maybe ask you for some advice? Totally understand if not. There was no mention of the past, no apology, just a request. The old Clementine would have ignored it, or maybe sent back a bitter reply, but I was different now. My success had given me a new perspective, a kind of clinical detachment. I was curious. I agreed to a phone call. Her voice was thin, fragile. She told me about the legal mess, the betrayal, the public shaming she was enduring. People are being so cruel, she said, her voice cracking. People I thought were my friends, they're saying the most horrible things about me online. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I listened patiently, offering generic but sound advice about finding a good lawyer and staying off social media. I was polite, distant. Then, toward the end of the call, her tone shifted. You know, she said quietly, I've been thinking a lot about high school lately. How awful it was, how awful we were. I held my breath. That day, she continued, at the assembly, what Mark and the guys did to you, I think about that sometimes. I never said anything, I was a coward. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement. Yes, I said, my voice even. You were. I'm sorry, Clementine, she whispered, for what it's worth. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. Her apology didn't heal the old wound, but it changed its shape. It introduced a new, unexpected variable into the equation of my past. She was the first one to crack. A few weeks later, an invitation appeared in my inbox, the Northgate High Class of 2008 15-year reunion. My immediate reaction was a visceral no. Why would I ever go back there? What was the point? I had already won. My success was my revenge. Then I went to the reunion's Facebook group, and there they were, Mark and Jessica, still reigning over their tiny digital kingdom. They were organizing the event, their posts full of the same arrogant bonhomie they'd always had. Then I saw it. A Throwback Thursday post from Mark. It was a blurry photo from the senior awards assembly. My back was to the camera as I walked toward the stage. His caption read, "Remember this? Funniest moment of senior year, TBT, Piggy." Jessica had commented, "OMG, I die every time I think of it. Can't wait to see everyone at the reunion. Hope we get some more classic moments like this one." The rage that I thought had been sublimated into my books came roaring back, hot and pure. They hadn't changed, they hadn't grown. They were still laughing at my deepest humiliation 15 years later. They felt no remorse because they had suffered no consequences. In that moment, my decision was made. My quiet, anonymous success wasn't enough. They needed to see me, they needed to know what I had become. And they needed to understand that the girl they had tried to destroy had built an empire from the rubble they'd left behind. I opened my laptop, went to the reunion website, and clicked the button to purchase one ticket. Then I booked a flight, reserved a hotel room, and emailed Mr. Harrison. "Dear Mr. Harrison," I wrote, "I know this is an odd request, but would you be interested in being my +1 at my 15-year high school reunion? There's a story reaching its final chapter, and I'd be honored if you were there to see it." He replied within the hour, "Clementine, I wouldn't miss it for the world." The venue was the ballroom of a local country club, the kind of place that smelled of stale money and lemon polish. It was dripping with beige and bad art, a perfect monument to suburban aspiration. I paused outside the doors, took a deep breath, and smoothed down the silk of my dress, a sharp, elegantly tailored black sheath that had cost more than my first car. This wasn't a dress, it was armor. I had spent the afternoon with a stylist. My hair, once a frizzy, untamable mess, was a sleek, dark curtain. My makeup was subtle but flawless. The shy, invisible girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her own value, calculated in bestseller lists and foreign rights deals. I walked in. Mr. Harrison was waiting for me just inside, looking endearingly out of place in his best tweed jacket. He smiled when he saw me, his eyes crinkling with pride. "Well, look at you, Clementine. Ready to face the dragons?" "I brought my own fire this time," I said, linking my arm through his. Heads turned as we entered. I saw the flickers of confusion in people's eyes. They knew they were supposed to know me, but the data wasn't computing. I saw them scanning my face, trying to place it, to reconcile the woman in front of them with the ghost in their memory. It didn't take long for the dragons to find me. "Oh my God, is that Clementine Brooks?" Jessica's voice, sharp as ever, cut through the din. She and Mark descended upon us, their faces a mixture of shock and amusement. "Clementine, wow, you actually showed up," Mark said, looking me up and down with a predatory sizing, up that hadn't changed at all. "You clean up nice." "I'm surprised you came," Jessica added, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "I figured you'd be at home, writing in your little diary." The insult was so predictable, so 15 years stale, that I almost laughed. They were still playing the same old song. Around them, a small circle of their acolytes had formed, watching, waiting for the show. Here it was, the final public slight, the moment they tried to put me back in the box they had built for me. But the box didn't fit anymore. I smiled, a calm, serene expression that I knew would infuriate them. "It's good to see you, too, Jessica, Mark." My calmness seemed to throw them off. They were expecting tears or a flustered retreat. They were expecting the girl from the assembly. They were not prepared for the woman who had negotiated a multi-million-dollar film contract. "So," Mark said, recovering his swagger, "what are you even up to these days, Clem? Still working at that bookstore in the city?" He was referencing a part-time college job I'd listed on my profile years ago. I just kept smiling. Something like that. Before they could press further, the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. "All right, Northgate grads, time for a little trip down memory lane. Get ready for our Where Are They Now slideshow." A large screen flickered to life at the front of the room. It was a cringeworthy parade of yearbook photos juxtaposed with current-day selfies. People cheered for the football captain who was now a dentist, the head cheerleader who sold real estate. I knew my turn was coming. I felt a cold knot of anticipation in my stomach. This was it. My dorky yearbook photo flashed onto the screen. Awkward smile, bad haircut, glasses. A few people snickered. The MC, a former student council treasurer named Kevin, squinted at his notes. "And Clementine Brooks," he announced. We couldn't find much online. So Clementine, what are you up to these days? Tell us all about it." All eyes in the room swiveled to me. Mark and Jessica were grinning, triumphant. They had me pinned. The loser, the blank slate, the girl with nothing to show for 15 years. This was the punchline they had been waiting for. I took a breath. I opened my mouth to speak. But I wasn't the one who answered. A voice from the edge of the crowd cut through the silence. "Are you kidding me, Kevin?" Brittany Vance stepped forward. She looked different from her phone call persona. She was pale and her dress was modest, but her eyes were clear and steady. She walked toward the front of the room, her gaze fixed on the screen, then on me. "You couldn't find much on Clementine Brooks?" she said, her voice ringing with disbelief. She turned to face the crowd. "That's because you're looking for the wrong name." A confused murmur went through the room. Mark and Jessica exchanged a look of annoyance, their show being interrupted. Brittany took a deep breath, her eyes finding mine across the room. I saw in them a flicker of that old cowardice, and then something new. Resolve. "What's Clementine up to?" she said, her voice growing stronger, more confident. "You're all reading it, or you're watching it, or your kids are obsessed with it. She's Verity Thorne." Silence. A deep, profound, absolute silence fell over the ballroom. You could have heard a name tag drop. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Then, chaos. A collective gasp. Someone in the front row whispered, "No way." People started fumbling for their phones, fingers flying across screens. I could see the dawning comprehension on their faces as they pulled up the author photo of Verity Thorneth professionally shot, enigmatic photo from my book jackets and compared it to the woman standing before them. It was me. Jessica's jaw literally dropped, her perfect, smug mask shattered, replaced by a slack-jawed look of utter disbelief. Mark went pale, the ruddy confidence draining from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack confusion. He looked from his phone to me and back again, as if trying to force reality to bend back into its comfortable shape. But Brittany wasn't done. She took the microphone from a stunned Kevin. "Yes," she said, her voice now commanding the room. "The Verity Thorne, author of the Sunken Kingdom Chronicles, the books that have sold 50 million copies worldwide. The books that are being made into one of the biggest movies of the decade." She paused, letting the information land with the force of a physical impact. Then she turned her gaze, slowly and deliberately, until it rested on Mark and Jessica. "And if you've ever read the books," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, cutting tone, "and you've ever wondered who the cruel, arrogant Prince Malachor and his whispering, venomous courtier Jesmine were based on, well, you don't have to wonder anymore. Just look around." Every single person in that room turned to stare at Mark and Jessica. It was a masterstroke, a public execution delivered with quiet, devastating precision. In that moment, they were no longer the popular king and queen. They were villains from a book. They were stripped of their power and rendered into pathetic, two-dimensional caricatures of their own cruelty. To my left, Mr. Harrison placed a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was an endorsement, a public alignment. He stood with me. Across the room, Sarah, my old college roommate whom I had flown in for this very moment, raised her glass in a silent, triumphant toast. The social geometry of the room had been irrevocably altered. The people who had orbited Mark and Jessica, the ones who had laughed at their jokes and validated their power, now looked at them with a mixture of pity and contempt. They began to shuffle away, creating a visible, physical distance. Mark and Jessica were left standing alone in a sudden, gaping vacuum of social irrelevance, their faces frozen in matching masks of horror and humiliation. I looked at them, truly looked at them, for the first time without fear, and I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, not even satisfaction, just a profound, serene, and final emptiness. Their power over me was gone. The memory that had lived in my head for 15 years had finally been evicted. I turned, linked my arm again through Mr. Harrison's, and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ruins of their small kingdom behind me without a single backward glance. The story was over. And I had written the perfect ending. The air outside the country club was cool and clean. It felt like the first breath after being underwater for a very long time. I left the cacophony of my past behind and stepped into the quiet of my present. Sarah met us at the car, her face alight with a fierce, protective joy. That, she said, pulling me into a hug, was the most epic mic drop in human history. I didn't feel epic. I felt light. The weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying, a 15-year-old burden of shame and injustice, had simply evaporated. It wasn't my burden anymore. I had handed it back to its owners, gift-wrapped in their own public humiliation. We drove away, leaving the flickering lights and dying party behind. My new reality was this: a car with true friends, people who had known and valued me long before Verity Thorne existed. My chosen family. The victory wasn't in the revenge, I realized, but in the freedom that came after. The fallout was swift and, from what I heard, brutal. The story of the reunion became a local legend overnight. Mark's business suffered. People didn't want to buy cars from Prince Malachor. His carefully constructed image as a hometown hero was shattered. Jessica's humiliation was more social. In a town built on reputation, hers was ruined. She was no longer the queen bee, but a cautionary tale, the villain from a famous book. Her rich husband, already dealing with his own scandal, was reportedly furious at the unwanted attention she had brought upon them. A few days later, I received a long, rambling email from Mark. It was a pathetic attempt at an apology, full of excuses and self-pity. He claimed he was just a kid, that he didn't realize how much it had hurt me, that my books were an unfair portrayal of him. It was an apology written not out of remorse but out of desperation. I read it and then I deleted it without a reply. Jessica left a tearful, hysterical voicemail. She begged for my forgiveness, pleading with me to issue a statement saying the characters weren't based on them. She was concerned about her standing in the community. Her pain was entirely narcissistic. I saved the voicemail as a reminder, a digital artifact of a battle won. I never called her back. Their apologies weren't for me, they were for them. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They didn't want my forgiveness. They wanted absolution. They wanted me to fix what they had broken. But that wasn't my job. The one person I did speak to again was Brittany. She called me a week later. "I don't know why I did that," she said, her voice hesitant. I do. When I saw them start in on you, it was like I was 16 again, and I just couldn't be that person anymore." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she replied. "It was 15 years too late, but I did." We talked for a long time. She was truly broken, but in that brokenness, she was becoming someone new, someone more honest. We didn't become best friends. The chasm of our shared history was too wide for that, but we established a new kind of relationship, one built on the truth of who we were now, not the lies of who we were then. It was a cautious, tentative peace. In the months that followed, I came to understand the true moral of my own story. My success wasn't the revenge. My freedom was the revenge. My peace was the revenge. The fact that I could wake up in the morning and not think about Mark Tanner or Jessica Reilly at all, that was the ultimate victory. I had established a new boundary, not just with them, but with my own past. Their judgment, their opinions, their very existence was no longer relevant to my life. My self-worth was no longer a fragile thing to be determined by a jury of my high school peers. It was forged in the fire of my own hard work, validated by my own achievements, and protected by the love of the family I had built for myself. I learned that the deepest wounds can become the most powerful weapons, not to hurt others, but to carve out a space for yourself in the world. The things they tried to use to diminish Memi sensitivity, my quiet observation, my love of stories, had become the very source of my strength. They thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize they were planting a seed. So that's my story. It's a story about bullies and bestsellers, about shame and success, but mostly it's about taking control of your own narrative. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where you were able to prove someone wrong, not with anger, but with your own success? Let me know in the comments below. I truly believe that sharing our stories is how we take our power back. Thank you so much for watching and for letting me share this piece of my life with you. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Remember this, no one else gets to write your ending, you hold the pen, so go out there and write a masterpiece.